Hello and welcome to another Debating Europe expert panel debate with me, Joe Lidobarski, the editor of Debating Europe, where we're going to take some of your questions and comments that you've sent us in on our website, debatingeurope.eu, and we're going to put them to a panel of experts. This one is on the future of the internet and the EU's effort to regulate big tech companies, looking particularly at the Digital Markets Act. And this is all very timely, particularly after Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg has set out his vision for the future of the internet, which he calls the metaverse. And we have a panel of experts who are going to be talking about their own ideas for the future of the internet, what it should look like, and what the place of regulators is in kind of designing this future. So joining me today are Carlos Zorrinho, who's a member of the European Parliament with the Socialist and Democrats group from Portugal. Carlos, welcome to Debating Europe's panel.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Also, we have Adam Cohen, who's the Director of Economic Policy at Google. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we've got Julia Anderson, who's an economist and former research analyst at Bruegel. Julia, thank you for being here.
Hi, Joe.
And also, last but not least, we have Maria Luisa Stasi, who's a senior legal officer at Article 19, which is a non-profit organization which is campaigning for freedom of expression, both online and offline. Isa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's kick things off. Let's start with a question from our readers. We're going to start with a question from Michal, who's very confused. Okay, so Michal wants to know, what is this discussion about the Digital Markets Act? He asks, didn't the EU try making new rules for the internet a few years ago? How is the DMA different from the GDPR or the DSA? What's it actually going to do? Carlos, can I start with you? Perhaps you could kind of help address this confusion that Michal has. What's the purpose of all of these rules, these regulations? What is the EU trying to do here?
So it's a very interesting question, and we know that the internet it's an ecosystem, and the DMA it's another ecosystem. What you need is to combine these two ecosystems. An ecosystem that will to have a fair competition between the different players in the digital market, also with the users, the end users, final users, consumers, producers, and so on. And in the other side, we need to put all this regulation work without create problems in the most important net neutrality. So what we need? You need to have a net neutrality, and sometimes you are trying to have also a net neutrality in the markets. So the way we choose to do that is very interesting, because it's to give the responsibility to assure the market neutrality to the bigger players in the market. So the legislation, the DMA, need to be very strong, and you need to trust on the DMA. You need to have also some very important provisions. I was the rapporteur from in ITRA committee. We approve an opinion. It's an opinion in all 27A, but it's an opinion to the final committee that is INCO. But in our opinion, it's approved with 73 votes for, 1 abstention. So a broad approval from all the groups in the parliament. We reinforce the idea that interoperability, opting in the consent to use the data to advertising, for instance, and accountability could be absolutely crucial to have a good ecosystem in the markets, work in the markets operation, but at some time, and this is the most important for me, it's to try to maintain in European Union and also to defend in the global perspective the idea that the governance of internet is a stakeholders governance. It's not to be used by the the more strong players to take advantage. And in this perspective, I also aim not to have a good DMA for the European digital markets, but also to inspire, as the GPDR do the same, I think, to inspire the debates that are now being developed in China. Okay, debates. Okay, there are debates in the United States, in Australia, in Japan, and so on. If we achieve to inspire this ecosystem, we could also be more easily winners in this ecosystem. But okay, it's not an easy challenge, and I understand that it's a little confusing. Mostly this idea, I don't know how to see it in English, but this idea that is the more powerful part of the system that is holding the system. But the idea that if they kill the system, if the powerest kill the system that is good for them, they kill also what is good for them.
This is, I think you've framed the debate very nicely, because I think actually a lot of the questions that you've raised are going to come, we'll see from comments that we have from readers. So I think it's a nice way. You spoke about kind of net neutrality, and if I kind of understand this sort of idea of the level playing field, but then also your last point about the what is the internet, the kind of global internet, and that kind of global vision, I think is really interesting. We're going to come on to those, but first I want to go to each of you in turn and just get your kind of opening thoughts about this debate. Julia, I'll come to you next. What do you think about maybe what Carlos has said, but also your own takes on what are the important aspects of this debate?
Yeah, so I think there's many elements to the internet. There's problems of privacy. Any problem in the real world can apply to the internet. The DMA tried to address a very particular issue, which is that there are dynamics that are perhaps inherent to these markets that mean that these markets tend to concentrate. So for instance, there's network effects. The more users they may be on a social media platform, the more attractive this platform is to other users or to advertisers, for instance. Consumers tend to also be a bit inert. I don't shop around for a new email provider, even every 10 years. There may also be issues around increasing returns to data. So the more data a platform has, the better its service become. The better its service become, the more users it attracts. These are all features that are natural. This is just the way the market is. And so some players will be more successful than others. And I think there's fair reward for also their ingenuity. Now, the problem becomes that when markets become incontestable, there are things that we simply don't like. This can have negative effect on cybersecurity if the market is too homogeneous. It can also have negative effect on consumers if innovation just doesn't happen anymore because the large leading players don't feel the competitive heat. There's also potential problems around social values. Perhaps we don't like when any one player has too much power, generates too high an income, and then has a very large voice in the public debate. There's many reasons, and I'm sure we'll get into that maybe there's a certain aversion to a few firms leading large chunks of the economy and being entrenched in that position. And that's what the DMA tries to address, not by regulating outcomes, but by tweaking here and there the way that the markets work to prevent some behaviors that are perhaps over-exploitative of the dynamics. Does it go far enough? I think we can also discuss that. But I think that's the general idea behind the DMA. And of course, some of the issues that we just discussed are competition related, and they are competition tools. But what seems to emerge as a conclusion in the EU is that, and also perhaps in the US, is that these tools are perhaps too slow for the fast-moving markets that we're trying to open up to competition.
Okay, interesting. Isa, maybe I can bring you in here. Like, so from your kind of organization is obviously working on kind of freedom expression. Perhaps you can respond to Michal's confusion and what this means for users basically. What does this mean for kind of people like Michal? This kind of this attempt to rethink the internet or remake the internet, I don't know, or kind of rationalize it. What does it mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess the main point is it's true when I share this wonder about why do we need the DMA now, or didn't we try to regulate the internet before, etc. But if you think about it, the e-commerce directive, which is one of the most important framework for internet services, was born or was decided and issued about 20 years ago, and that was at the beginning of the digital world, and the focus was on e-commerce. And now, in those years, major parts of our life have migrated online. So we use online markets and online services to communicate, to access information, to share information, to access content, to interact with people, to have assemblies online, and in the past 2 years, to have everything online. So the context has changed a lot. And I think what the DMA is trying, why it is relevant for a user, for a person, for an individual, is because it focuses on the markets and not on the services themselves. So the e-commerce and the DSA now and the GDPR, they're extremely important and meaningful pieces of legislation, and focus on how the services needs to be provided. But that's not the end of the story, because the point is where these services are provided. So in a way, the DMA is the ambitious, and I think it has the vision somehow, and I strongly support this vision, although there might be things that needs to be fixed in the current proposal. But the ambition is to say, okay, we need to shape also the playing field, right? And then we can decide the rules of the game. So I see the DMA as doing this bit, trying to reshape the markets, look at the market and say, okay, do we need to reshape them? Because all in all, what we're talking about is our communication infrastructure. So it's a very fundamental part of our democracy. Are those markets working well? Do we need to reshape something? Do we need to make them more contestable? Are they fair enough? And in theory, this is the vision, I think, behind the DMA, and this is why it is important to get it right.
Interesting. Okay, Adam, let's come to you. So we've heard from Carlos was saying, if I can quote him, he said, "Those with the power do not always know what is good for them." Julia talks about innovation, saying having good innovation, good regulation, can support innovation. What is your perspective? What's Google's perspective on this? What is, as you see the DMA, what's it trying to achieve, and do you think it, in the kind of current state of the negotiations, can kind of meet those goals?
Well, I absolutely agree with the idea that good regulation is the best foundation for an innovative and dynamic economy. And our view on the Digital Markets Act is that it's very important to get this right. This legislation is going to determine how technology platforms like Google can operate in Europe in the coming years. It will have consequences for the European economy and for the many consumers and businesses that use our products every day because they find them useful, because they find them efficient, because they help them in their daily lives. At a very fundamental level, the DMA is going to affect how we develop our technologies and how we evolve. And this legislation is very limited in its scope. It only focuses on 4 or 5 US technology companies, rather than doing what regulation typically does, which is establish broad principles that are widely applicable to companies, large and small, operating across the economy. And this is why this really different type of regulation, when you're applying this, I think it's important to get the details right so that some of these difficult trade-offs in how companies evolve their products and services, in whose interests they're developing and evolving, and who benefits. I think getting those details right is going to be very, very important. When we think about Google's role in Europe, we see ourselves as being an enabler of Europe's digital transformation, helping hundreds of businesses, hundreds of thousands of businesses across the European Union getting online for the first time, enabling them to grow and expand using our tools. We are enabling Europe's economy. We're helping promote economic growth, helping promote exports, and increases in productivity. A recent study shows that Google's consumer products alone are creating 420 billion euros a year in value for Europeans. It's really important that we are promoting and protecting economic growth, and that we are regulating in the interests of consumers and making sure that these rules don't end up in a situation where Europeans are using second-class technologies and second-class tools.
Carlos, I want to come to you on this because I think this gets to the heart of what you were saying about, are we inspiring a conversation that is happening globally, or are we just regulating? Is it a kind of stealth protectionism? So there's two comments from users here which speak to this. One is from Ben, who asks, what power does the EU actually have over foreign companies? Adam just said, the DMA is focusing on a small number of US tech companies. And then a question from Proactive, he's a long-time reader. He's normally very skeptical, but he's actually quite enthusiastic about the EU as a regulatory superpower. His words, he says, the internet is global, so will these rules impact internet globally or just in Europe? Maybe Carlos, you can talk to this. First of all, what is the EU doing regulating US tech companies? Is this really a global conversation?
It's a very interesting conversation, but sometimes there are a debate in the European Parliament and the European institutions about why not to invest to have an European Google? And I go address directly the question. And my answer is always to say, no, we don't need to have an European Google. If there are, okay, very good. But you don't need to have artificially an European Google. What you need is to have Google operating in the European Union with European Union values. And this is the perspective also that we try to put not only in the DMA, but also in our, for instance, I was shadow rapporteur in Digital Europe program. We have now the ethical scheme to all the companies that want to operate in Europe. And I think this is very important. It's to have Google, okay, welcome, very important for our daily life, also for my daily life. But operating in Europe with European values, this is a really very, very, very important issue. And the second question about this is something to regulate the US high-tech companies. In ITRE committee, I propose and is approved to have thresholds that with these thresholds we have not only European user gatekeepers, but also European gatekeepers. I think it's very important first to have from the beginning European gatekeepers, and also to work in our market, in our programs, to have more and more European gatekeepers. And to address the question that is also very interesting, that is in the questions that we have, is how to deal with the problem that if you have a good startup, immediately the USA companies will buy these startups. We need also to have a good regulation about mergers, and you have that in the proposal from ITRE to the DMA. Finally, I think it's important also another question. I'm a member of the European Parliament. I'm European, but I'm also Portuguese, and I know that the whole of the national authorities are important. But if you want really to have power to regulate this market, we need to avoid fragmentation. And in the opinion of ITRE, we avoid all fragmentation. The authorities, the stakeholders, national authorities, national courts, all that need to be here, need to be a consultative job, give data to the decision, but we need to have a centralized decision, because even the 27 countries in a centralized decision are not big enough to regulate. If you fragment this power, it's not possible.
I think those are two really interesting points that we're gonna come to. First, this question of European gatekeepers. I think that has come from some of our readers. We'll get onto that. And this question about fragmentation is also very interesting. But I want to stick first of all on this question of the global internet, because it's a global internet. And if we Julia, perhaps I can come to you. You said in your first kind of remark about regulation, how it can support innovation, but doesn't the regulation if you're talking about the global internet, to avoid kind of fragmentation, shouldn't it be global regulation? This is kind of almost what Proactive is sort of saying. He says, is the EU a regulatory superpower? The internet is global, so will these rules impact the internet globally or just in Europe? What would you say?
Well, so of course, the EU law will apply in EU territory. Now, the question of whether it will have an impact outside of the EU, I think I sympathize to some extent with Proactive's skepticism around what is now termed the Brussels effect of the EU. This idea that for pure market economic reasons, the EU regulatory framework would move beyond borders because we have such a large market, because our consumers are wealthy, and because we have the stricter standards in some domains. It makes more sense for economic actors, for firms, to produce the version of the good that has embedded the EU standards just once and then export it everywhere, rather than produce different versions. But this argument really relies on a lot of assumption as to the nature of the produce. And in digital markets, there may be a lot of instances where it's actually quite cheap to have a version of the produce that, is abiding by EU rules and one that is not. So, for instance, this no self-preferencing rule that's in the DMA, which is the idea that a platform would not be allowed to give preference to its own product and services in search results, for instance. I think it would be relatively easy, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe Adam can intervene here, to have no self-preferencing in the EU and self-preferencing in the US, for instance. So I'm not really convinced that the DMA would really benefit from this kind of magical Brussels effect. And I think that what the Brussels effect also obscures is the fact that there are real mechanisms through which Europe can have regulatory power. And that has to do with multilateralism and dialogues with our international partners. The fact is that GDPR, which is often used as an example of the Brussels effect in action, which is debatable, was some of the provisions were actually inspired by US law, by Australian law, by Canadian law. So if we acknowledge that this is a conversation that we're all having, maybe we can actually create a space where we can come together and agree on the terms that would be preferable.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I want to introduce, I'm going to bring Adam in, but I want to introduce just some final input from our readers. On this question of European gatekeepers, like how do we produce European gatekeepers? Two comments perhaps. The first one comes from Michael, who asks, what can the EU do to create its own big tech companies instead of regulating companies from other countries? And then a slightly provocative comment from David, who says, it seems pretty futile to create tech startups in Europe if the successful ones are immediately bought up by some mega corporation eager to wipe out the competition. Will the DMA do anything to address this? Which is not very diplomatically put, but it's the same sort of language I have heard from Vestager when she speaks about this. She puts it maybe slightly less bluntly, but she makes essentially the same point. Adam, what's kind of Google's response to this?
I think the notion of different approaches in different countries already exists for many different companies around the world. EU rules are different than US rules, they're different than rules in China, and the world is probably more fragmented than this conversation might suggest. I kind of question the ambition of just exporting regulation, right? I mean, and we're talking about really important designs for really crucial technologies in people's lives. And when we think about this notion of self-preferencing, yeah, it sounds, companies shouldn't give themselves unfair advantages. We agree with that. But what this regulation really talks about is whether or not product integration, which is widespread across the economy. You buy a car today, it comes with a radio pre-installed, it comes with a GPS, it comes with seat belts, it comes with a steering wheel. All of these were components that were sold separately at different times in the history of the automobile. And there's no question about whether that integrated product is more useful for the consumer. My concern is that with something like the Digital Markets Act, this smartphone that I have today, if that regulation was in effect, what we would probably have is cell phones that made calls only. We'd have text messaging devices that were separate. We would have digital cameras around our necks when we went places, and we'd have paper folding maps in our pockets. And instead, what you get today is a fully integrated product. It comes with choice inbuilt. Consumers are in control of these devices. You want a different map, you download it, it takes a couple of seconds. You want to use a different, online social media service, you download TikTok, you download Snapchat. You don't have to use the services that are pre-installed. There's plenty of choice on these devices. And I think the idea of creating these very strict rules with no flexibility could create problems. We're not opposed to these rules, but we're advocating smart rules, smart regulation, where we can analyze the situations as these products and services are developed. We don't want to hold back innovation, and we don't want to hold back benefits to consumers and businesses.
Okay, we're out of time. We're going to go final remarks. I'll just maybe frame it with the last question from Nicholas, who, kind of building on what Adam said, says, is there a risk of the EU over-regulating and breaking how the internet works? Bearing in mind Adam's also point that the internet is maybe more fragmented than that framing might suggest. But Isa, what do you say? Final remarks.
Well, I think that what's very important is definitely to have right regulation and not to over-regulate or to kill innovation, competition, everything we said. It's excellent. But I also think that if we see again these digital markets are as the place where we move and interact and live part of our lives, it's also I think what's very fundamental is to get to a consensus on the vision that we have. The internet was born as an open, free, and very democratic environment because no one was capturing the power over the interactions. It was very much peer-to-peer. And now we are in a situation where this is not true anymore. We have concentration of powers at different layers. So as long as we have a common vision and we're going to bring that back and make sure that the services that are offered online and the interaction that happens, they do comply with international standards on human rights, which again are international, so there is consensus on those as well. I don't think we have any, that should be the right path to go, I guess. Then the details and what is really needed, it's extremely context dependent. So it might happen that we have different needs in different countries, and that we will need to have different and differently tailored regulation for those concepts. But the vision needs to be the same. The goals needs to be the same, I think.
Perfect. And that brings us full circle to the opening kind of question, which is about visions for the future of the internet. Carlos, I know that you have to go. What are your kind of final thoughts on this as we wrap up the debate?
Thank you. I have now presidential votes in the European Parliament. We return to have that. Is a good sign up. I hope that you are winning this battle against the pandemics, but okay, we will see. But what I want to share is that we don't want to, my aim, I don't know, that you are 705 members of the European Parliament. I don't want to export regulations. No, I don't work about regulations, I work about politics. What I want is to share values. And I think that the European Union has some values that are really good to share in a multilateral perspective. The idea of privacy, the right of privacy, the right of opt-in to give and to consent to give the data. As I propose to have a data deal. If you have a green deal, you need also to have a data deal in the world, to consent to give data, but to know what we receive in services, in solutions, in better life with this data. The inclusivity, the democracy. Is that values that what I wish to share? It's not regulation, no. But regulation is a thing for lawyers. It's a very good business, but I want to work about politics. And last week in another part of my job, I'm the leader of the delegation of the European Parliament to Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. I was in Mozambique, for instance, in Cabo Delgado. What I a very territory with a lot of big problems. What I want is to share this kind of values in the multilateral perspective, promoting partnerships between equals. And all the big enterprises that do that are welcome in this job.
Thank you. Adam, final remarks?
I think articulating those values is extremely important, and I would say from my perspective, we support these, and what we would advocate here is a very close look at the regulation that's been drafted, because there are some aspects of it that are very smart and very, I think, well intended, promoting interoperability, making sure that technologies work together, so consumers are really picking and choosing the services that they want to use. But embedded in this regulation, Carlos, are some things that don't jive with what you're describing. So you talk about privacy, but the regulation actually says only for these 4 or 5 companies is this special type of consumer opt-in required. So that doesn't enhance privacy.
Perhaps 12 or 15.
Well, even if it's 12 or 15, right? That's not a principle that enhances privacy. It's designed to constrain the products of specific companies. And I think that is something that needs a closer look from the European Parliament, from yourself, if we're developing regulation that's for people. Your point is about politics. Politics is for people. Write rules that work for people. Write rules that make technologies that make people's lives better, that improve businesses, that help the European economy, and take a close look at some of the aspects of the DMA that don't work very well. That's my humble request.
Okay, Julia, I'm going to give you the final word, and then we're going to close this. Julia, what do you have to say?
Okay, so I think I agree with all of you, which is that, yes, we'll need to do a lot of discussion before we set the rules. We need to get as much evidence as we can, and we need to be smart about it. No one wants to break the internet, but at the same time, they are political choices that need to be made. I mean, I'm going to do this stupid, banal economist remark that there are trade-offs, and at some point, we need to position ourselves on those trade-offs. So yes, there are risks of over-regulation. They're very new markets and they're very complex, and we don't fully understand everything. But at some point, we'll need to draw the line.
Okay, that's a good note to end on, I think. Okay, so while everyone is kind of scratching their heads and thinking what should be the vision for the future of the internet, which I hope this discussion has helped to kind of kickstart that, you watching this at home, I'd like to thank my panel for taking part in the debate. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a really kind of meaty debate. I think we could have gone on for longer. Of course we could have, but we have to stop. So please, if you are interested in continuing this debate, you can go to our website, debatingeurope.eu. You can add more comments. You can add to the debate online, and we'll take them to further panel discussions like this. Obviously, please like and subscribe. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again in a future panel. Thank you.